My first full-time job in sales was way back in 1976 as a commission-only salesperson in the financial services industry. But what I'm about to share with you applies to everyone, no matter what they do in their careers, businesses, and even their private lives. I'm just using sales as an example. Back in 1976 and for several years after, there was no internet, no computers, no mobile telephones. They were a very recent invention. They weighed a ton and were too expensive for most of us and had a battery life of around 30 minutes. Calculators and fax machines had only just been invented and were also very expensive and hard to come by. When it came to typing letters, I had to be totally focused, know precisely what I wanted to say, and be extremely careful not to make any mistakes when typing. There was no backspace or erase on a typewriter. If I made a mistake, I had to start all over again. And I made quite a few mistakes. As for calculating costs and preparing quotations, we had to be really good at mathematics, and it took an awful lot longer than a few taps of a finger on a calculator. And as for social media, the closest to that was the births and deaths columns in the local newspaper. Also quite useful for prospecting, but that's another story. When it came to prospecting for new business and selling, there were basically only 4 methods available to me. Cold calling on the telephone, sending a letter followed by a telephone call several days later, cold calling in person, commonly known as door knocking, and obtaining referrals from others, which still involved letters and telephone calls to contact the referral. As for learning new or improved ways of selling, there were very few seminars, not many books or cassette tapes on selling techniques, and very little personal development material. Yet, in spite of the seemingly restricted ways of doing business, I was just as productive back then as I am today, in fact, more so. In those days, the 80-20 rule applied in sales. 80% of sales came from 20% of the sales team. The reason being that the top 20% worked hard and smart at it, and the 80% were somewhat lazy or lacked skills and were not coachable or had no one to coach them. So much has changed since 1976. But in spite of the many additional tools we have at our disposal, what's really interesting is that in many companies nowadays, the 90-10 rule applies. 90% of sales come from just 10% of the sales team. Why the heck is this? Why isn't everyone selling so much more? There's many reasons for this: increased competition, internet savvy buyers, etc., all of which can be overcome. But I believe there are 2 fundamental reasons: lack of focus and too many distractions. I just had 4 things to focus on: composing and typing excellent letters, making telephone calls to prospects and customers, cold calling face to face. I walked miles around factory estates and office blocks, knocking on doors and asking to see a decision maker. And I always asked for referrals, whether I sold to a prospect or not. I had no other distractions, no emails, no social media messages, no mobile telephone calls, nothing. So I could stay totally focused on sales. Or be like the 80% of the salespeople in our team and just laze around and do little. But I needed and wanted the money and the prestige of being recognised as the best. So the moral to the story is this: if you want to be the very best you can be, Sure, use all the tools you have available to help you to do more business, but stay focused and avoid distraction. It's really not that difficult with a little and possibly a lot of self-discipline.